New York, 1977. The record store on West 48th Street had been there since 1952, and it looked like nobody had cleaned it since then either. Dust hung in the air, visible only when the afternoon sun cut through the grimy window at exactly the right angle. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The owner, a man named Theodore Wells, sat behind the counter with his eyes half closed, his hearing aid turned down low because the silence was easier than the effort of listening. The walls were covered with faded concert posters from the 50s and 60s. Miles Davis at the Village Vanguard, Billie Holiday at Carnegie Hall, names that used to mean everything, now just ghosts watching over a dying business. Marvin Gaye pushed open the door. The bell above didn't ring. It had stopped working years ago, like so many things in Theodore's store. Marvin stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, breathing in the smell of old cardboard and dust and vinyl records, left too long in one place. He had been in New York for meetings with Columbia Records, talks that went nowhere because everyone wanted him to be something he wasn't anymore. They wanted the smooth romantic, the duet partner, the safe voice that made white audiences comfortable. They didn't want the man who had recorded what's going on. They didn't want complexity or questions. The executives had smiled and used words like commercial viability and demographic appeal, and Marvin had sat there feeling like he was watching himself from a distance. When they suggested another album of duets, maybe with a younger female artist, something inside him shut down completely. So Marvin had walked out mid-sentence about chart positions. He had wandered the streets for hours, watching people move past him with purpose. His feet hurt. His head hurt. The space between who he was and who everyone wanted him to be had never felt wider. And then he found himself in front of this forgotten place, this store that looked like it had given up trying to be relevant, and something about that felt honest. The store was narrow and deep, with shelves that climbed to the ceiling. Theodore didn't look up when Marvin entered. He was reading a newspaper from 3 days ago, finding comfort in repetition. Marvin moved through the aisles slowly. He ran his fingers along the spines of albums, feeling the cardboard edges, the slight give of jackets opened and closed too many times. In the soul section, pushed against the back wall where the light barely reached, he found himself. 7 albums arranged in no order, their covers faded. The plastic sleeves were clouded with dust. Nobody had touched these records in months, maybe years. Marvin pulled out "Let's Get It On." The cover showed him younger, confident. He studied the photograph like he was looking at a stranger. That man had believed things would work out. That man hadn't watched Tammy Terrell die. That man hadn't spent 2 years in Belgium hiding from the IRS and his own reflection. He carried the album to the counter. Theodore finally looked up, his eyes moving from the record to Marvin's face with no recognition. Marvin placed the album on the glass counter, and Theodore picked it up with hands that trembled slightly. "You want this one?" Theodore's voice was rough, underused. "I was hoping to listen to it first," Marvin said quietly. Theodore studied him for a moment, then nodded toward an old turntable in the corner. Marvin walked over, removed the record from its sleeve, and placed it on the turntable. The vinyl was dusty. He wiped it gently with his sleeve. The needle dropped. There was a moment of crackle, and then his own voice filled the room. Not loud, but present. The opening notes of the title track, that sliding bass line, the whispered introduction. Theodore's head lifted. His hand moved to his hearing aid, turning it up slowly. The music grew clearer. Marvin watched from across the room as the old man's expression changed, as something that had been closed for a long time began to open. "I know this song," Theodore said, not to Marvin, but to himself. "I used to know this song." Marvin didn't respond. He stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, watching Theodore's face as the music worked through him. The old man's eyes had closed. His hands, which had been resting on the counter, began to move slightly, not quite tapping, not quite conducting, just responding to something his body remembered, even if his mind had filed it away. "This voice," Theodore continued, still not looking at Marvin, "this voice reminds me of someone." "Who?" Marvin asked, though he knew Theodore wasn't really talking to him. "My wife," Theodore said, and his voice cracked on the word. "She loved this music. She used to play it in here before her hands stopped working, before the cancer. Marvin felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He had come in for anonymity, for the comfort of being unknown, and instead he had stumbled into someone else's grief. The song continued. Marvin's voice, younger and more certain than the man standing in the store, sang about love and connection and the healing power of being close to another person. Theodore's hands were shaking more now, but not from age. His eyes were wet. She would dance, Theodore said, and he stood up from his stool, slowly, carefully. Right here, behind the counter. She would dance and tell me to stop being so serious. She said music was medicine, and I was always sick with worry. Worried about money, about the store. And she would just laugh and say, Theodore, nobody comes here for efficiency. They come here because we remember their names. His voice had taken on a different quality now, younger somehow. She knew every customer, knew their stories. Music wasn't product to Eleanor, it was connection. Marvin watched as Theodore began to move. It wasn't really dancing, more like swaying, a gentle rocking that suggested the memory of movement rather than movement itself. His hands lifted slightly as if reaching for someone who wasn't there. But there was something beautiful in it, something that made Marvin understand why he had walked into the store. This was what music was supposed to do. This was why any of it mattered. The song reached its peak, the chorus building, Marvin's voice layering over itself, creating harmonies with his own past. Theodore's eyes opened, and for the first time, he really looked at Marvin, really saw him. You, Theodore said, you know this music. I do, Marvin said. Not just know it, you feel it. I can tell. The way you're standing there, the way you're watching me. You understand what this voice is doing. Marvin nodded slowly. The voice is trying to heal something. Is it working? Theodore asked. And there was genuine curiosity in the question, as if he needed Marvin to tell him whether the medicine was real. Sometimes, Marvin said, not always, but sometimes. The song ended. The needle continued to spin, the soft crackle of the run-out groove filling the space between them. Theodore walked over to the turntable and lifted the needle with surprising gentleness. He held the record up to the light, examining it like an artifact from a lost civilization. Marvin Gaye, Theodore read from the label. I should remember this name. It's okay if you don't, Marvin said. No, Theodore insisted. My wife, she would be disappointed if I forgot. She remembered everything about music, every voice, every name, every story. She said that was the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is what your ears do. Listening is what your heart does. Marvin felt something shift inside him. All day people had been talking at him, telling him what he should do, who he should be, how he should sound. And here was this old man who didn't know who he was, teaching him something about his own work. Can I ask you something? Marvin said. Of course. When you listen to this voice, what do you hear? Theodore considered the question seriously. He placed the record back in its sleeve, handling it like it was fragile, precious. I hear someone who is lonely, he said finally. Not alone. Lonely. There's a difference. Alone is physical. Lonely is when you're surrounded by people and still feel like nobody really sees you. Marvin's breath caught. He hadn't expected to be understood. Not like this. Not by someone who had no idea they were talking directly to the source. Is that what you hear? Theodore asked. Yes, Marvin said quietly. That's exactly what I hear. Theodore nodded, satisfied. He walked back to the counter and carefully placed the record in a paper bag. How much? Marvin asked. $3, Theodore said. Marvin pulled out his wallet, but Theodore held up his hand. Actually, no. This record stays here. Why? Because you helped me remember something, Theodore said. You helped me hear my wife again. That's worth more than $3. That's worth keeping the record here, in this store. So maybe someone else will come in and I can play it for them and remember again. Marvin understood. He put his wallet away. Can I ask what your wife's name was? Eleanor, Theodore said, and saying her name made him smile. Eleanor Wells. She died 2 years ago, and I've been turning down my hearing aid ever since because I didn't want to hear the world without her voice in it. But you turned it up for this song, Marvin said. I did, Theodore admitted. I don't know why. Something about your face. The way you were standing there. You look like someone who needed the music as much as I did. Marvin felt his throat tighten. He had spent the entire day being strong, being professional, maintaining the image that everyone expected. And now in this dusty store, with a man who didn't know who he was, he felt the mask slip. Thank you, Marvin said. For what? For listening. Theodore smiled, a real smile that creased his face in unfamiliar ways. Thank you for making me turn up my hearing aid. Marvin walked toward the door. His hand was on the handle when Theodore called out to him. Hey, friend, what's your name? Marvin turned. He could tell the truth. He could reveal himself. Watch Theodore's face change. Watch the moment of recognition destroy the simplicity of what had just happened. Or he could leave things as they were, perfect and unfinished. I'm just a listener, Marvin said. Theodore nodded, accepting this. Well, listener, come back sometime. I'll play this record for you again. I think I need to start listening more often. Marvin pushed open the door and stepped into the street. The evening air was cool, the city sounds loud after the muffled quiet of the store. He stood on the sidewalk looking back through the dusty window. Inside, Theodore had put the record on again. Marvin could see him swaying behind the counter, his eyes closed, his hands moving with the memory of Eleanor. As Marvin walked away, his own voice followed him down the street, spilling out through the gaps in the door, mixing with the traffic and the voices of strangers. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like running from it. He didn't feel the need to be anyone other than the person he was in that moment, a man who had made music that helped someone remember love. 2 blocks away, Marvin stopped at a payphone. The receiver was cold against his ear. He called his manager and told him to cancel the Columbia meetings. All of them. He wasn't interested in being what they wanted. He was interested in making music that did what that record had done in Theodore's store. Something that could cut through dust and grief and broken hearing aids and reach the part of people that still needed to dance. His manager tried to argue. Do you understand what you're throwing away? But Marvin wasn't listening to the words. He was listening to the tone underneath them, the familiar sound of someone trying to package him, sell him, turn him into something marketable. I need to make music that matters, Marvin said quietly. Your music does matter. That's why Columbia wants you. They want my voice. They don't want me. In that silence, Marvin understood something. Theodore had wanted the voice too, had needed it to remember Eleanor. But he had also seen Marvin, the man standing in his store, the listener who understood loneliness. There was a difference. He never went back to the store. Part of him wanted to check on Theodore, but he understood that going back would change what had happened. It would make it about Marvin Gaye, the artist, instead of about the music and what it could do when nobody was watching. But for years afterward, whenever he felt lost or pressured to be something he wasn't, he would remember Theodore's question, is it working? He would think about Eleanor dancing behind the counter, about hands that forgot to listen, finally remembering, about the difference between hearing and listening. He would think about how his voice, divorced from his face and his name, had reached into someone's grief and pulled them back toward life. That became his measure of success, not chart positions or sales figures. The real question was always whether the music was working, whether it was reaching someone in a dusty store at exactly the moment they needed it, whether it was medicine. Some voices don't need recognition to matter. They just need to reach one person at the right moment, in the right way, and remind them that feeling something is still possible, even after everything else has gone quiet. Even after the bell stops ringing and the dust settles and the world forgets to listen, the music remembers. And sometimes in stores nobody visits, behind counters where love once danced, someone turns up their hearing aid and lets the sound back in. That's enough.